All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of The Crowded Booth. My name is Bryce Kuhn. Today, we're taking a look at the Georgia spring game. Obviously, big news coming out of Athens. Bear Alexander entering the transfer portal. A lot of quarterback controversy or competition, however you want to look at it. And talking about what other things do we see in the spring game, bringing a good friend in, Palmer Thombs. Here he is. Palmer was boots on the ground in Athens, as he always is, covering Georgia for On3 and doing a fantastic job with that coverage as well. Palmer, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a minute, and I'm glad to get you back on the show.
Yeah, always excited to come on here and talk a little Georgia football. Like you said, spring game. This was an eventful spring for Georgia. Feels like it's been forever since they suited up and kicked the crap out of TCU. But just excited to see those guys back out on the field, to see something different. Spring football. I'm sure you can feel this a little bit as well, but there's a little bit of a drag that comes with it because it's the same storylines, and you're maybe not necessarily seeing as much as you would hope. And there's only so many ways that you can spin things without actually seeing it yourself and being able to put your own spin on it. The players say the same things over and over and over again. But actually seeing those guys between the hedges was great. So certainly an exciting time of year.
Awesome. No worries. I'm just going to have to cut it because it just froze on my end. Can you still see me?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, one thing that you don't have to necessarily put a spin on is the Bear Alexander news. Bear Alexander entering the transfer portal. Paul, if I'm not mistaken, it opened up on Saturday, the 15th. And this news, did it drop on Friday, or is this coming out like the day of the spring game?
It came out.
A wild weekend.
I was packing my stuff up, getting ready to get in the car and head over to the stadium as it happened. So I sat in my apartment parking lot and wrote that one real quick.
So let's start off with this. And obviously, I know there's been a lot of thoughts. I've perused the message boards on a lot of different mediums. There's been a lot of thoughts on Bear Alexander, but from I'll give you your professional opinion. Was this expected? We'll ask this. In this business, we know, was this a pre-write? Did you already have this pre-written? Obviously not. How on the scale does this rank as a big of a surprise with Alexander leaving the program when it felt like a lot? He was primed for a really big season in Athens.
Yeah, he was, especially considering what they're losing in Jalen Carter. The development that they've had on that defensive line over the last couple of years. There was a lot of excitement around Bear Alexander and what he could be. Had 2 tackles for loss with a sack in the national championship game. When Carter was out earlier in the season, Bear stepped in and played a bigger role and really showed, as a true freshman, showed signs of growth and development. Here's what I will say about this is that this is not a surprise. Being around the program, you hear a little bit here and there. Like you said, the message boards have kind of covered that pretty well. This is not all too surprising. Bear Alexander flirted with the transfer portal in that first go around and ultimately did not go. And so from that aspect, the fact that he did go this time and stuck around and partook in spring practice, maybe that's the surprising part, that he didn't do it the first time. And, it felt like Georgia had avoided that and that they were going to be good to go and that Bear Alexander was going to be a part of their plans for this fall. Obviously, that did not come to fruition. He hits the portal and looks like he's headed west, whether that's a shorter trip to Texas or a further trip across the country to USC remains to be seen. But certainly, look, this is a kid that has played his past 5 seasons of football at 5 different schools.
Including high school, yeah.
This next one will be a 6th in 6 years. It hasn't been easy for Bear Alexander. His recruitment wasn't easy for Georgia either. Was a commit, decommitted. I can't remember whether he actually committed to Texas A&M or was heavily thought to be leaning there. Ultimately decides to sign with Georgia. It's been a long journey for Georgia and Bear Alexander, and that came to a close on Saturday.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one. I mean, just reading obviously some of the fans' reactions on social media, on the message boards. I mean, look, you hate to lose a guy with the talent of Barry Alexander. I think that's where we separate it, and you and I've talked about multiple things where you have to separate. Here's what happened on this side. Here's what's happened on the other side. This might be a dumb question. How much is NIL playing into this? The opportunities that the two schools you just mentioned, which are picking up steam and really machines when we talk about the NIL era, kind of the forefront of that. I mean, the opportunity there for Barry Alexander, I guarantee you it's something that was when they were bending his ear, which, look, I'll say it so you don't have to. These conversations were happening. This is for us to think that a kid's just going to enter the portal a mere hours after it opens and to say, and two schools are to be highlighted, like it's going to happen. So kind of with this, I mean, how much of a role do you think this plays in? And is it more of Georgia can't match that, or was there just a genuine interest in leaving? I mean, why the leaving there if Georgia has NIL capability?
Yeah, like you said, those two schools have really become major powerhouses in the NIL world of recruiting and the transfer portal. Look at Georgia and AD Mitchell. Those were the two schools that were mentioned with him very heavily, and ultimately he heads home to Texas. Bear being from Texas, that's also in consideration. But with everything USC has done in the transfer portal, over the last few years of NIL and Lincoln Riley being there, that's obviously an attractive option too. I think that Kirby was asked about Bear and his departure after the game and on Saturday, and he didn't address it head on, more so hit it indirectly and kind of said, this is the way of the world these days. And this is the transfer. That's the nature of the transfer portal. And, didn't necessarily bring up NIL. I think he kind of alluded to that a little bit, that opportunities are out there for everyone. They've benefited from the transfer portal. They've lost kids to the transfer portal. And so it's a two-way street, especially when you're bringing in players that are as talented as the caliber that Georgia has done over the last couple of years from traditional recruiting. Georgia's not going to want to build its program on the transfer portal, but they're probably absolutely not going to deny a very talented player that wants to come to them by way of the portal. So it's absolutely interesting to see, how Georgia handles that, both the guys coming in and the guys headed out.
Yeah, and you mentioned, obviously we're going to get to this kind of the next part of this. The second part is, look, Georgia's recruited really well, and I think you don't have to be a Georgia fan to see that. We do obviously have a lot of fans that watch our channel in this, and fans not of Georgia, fans of Georgia. But when you look at the depth chart behind them, Palmer, I mean, what is your message to the fans if you want to say, look, Bear Alexander is a great talent, but a team like Georgia doesn't live and die by one player. And I think while Alexander is a fantastic talent and is probably going to be a fantastic player, whether in Los Angeles or in Austin, Texas, there's some really good players behind him. I wanted to mention some of these names and let you kind of go off of this. Obviously, you have a veteran in Nazir Stackhouse who's been around the program, understands what it takes to perform at Georgia, and another guy who has seen the guys before him, Devontae Wyatt, Jordan Davis 2 years ago. I mean, obviously, other players as well, Jalen Carter. I mean, seeing what these guys have done. Zion Logue, another veteran. I mean, those are two veterans right there. Are those the leaders of the room? And where else does Georgia look to kind of fill that interior defensive line that's been so good over the recent years?
Absolutely. Those are the leaders of the room. And those are guys that are leaders of this team as older players in general. I would add Warren Brinson to that mix as well. Being that those guys are all in their fourth or fifth year with the program.
We're almost done. We're almost through with that when it comes to rosters.
Yeah. And you're looking at guys. First of all, none of those three have to leave Georgia after this year. Tramel Walthour is the only defensive lineman that is out of eligibility after this season. So Georgia very well could be relying on those guys going forward. They certainly will this year. Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, and Zion Logue, like I said, Logue had a sack in the spring game. That's obviously a good sign there. But I think Georgia was going to be counting on those guys, whether Bear Alexander was with them or not. I think the guys that you're going to be looking at to step up into the role that Bear was going to be playing. I look at a guy like Christian Miller, who was in that same signing class as Bear Alexander. Didn't play quite as much as Alexander did this past season, but certainly got his feet wet and had a really strong spring. He too had a sack during the spring game. Jonathan Jefferson had a sack during the spring game, and 3 tackles for both Miller and Jefferson. Those 2 guys on the interior. And then a guy that I look at, as we talk about the recruiting aspect of this and, where Georgia has recruited so well, Jordan Hall is an absolute freak show on that defensive line. Was a 5-star according to On3, 247 Rivals. ESPN was the only one that did not have him as a top 15, 20 player. And so he would have been a 5-star plus player had ESPN, maybe put a little bit more into their recruiting budget. But he has 2 pass breakups in the game on Saturday. Looked a little bit heavier. I do think that there's some weight that can get cut off this offseason. And look, the hot summer of Georgia will do that regardless, whether you're trying to or not. So Jordan Hall, certainly going to be somebody that is going to be relied on this year as a true freshman, just as Bear was the year before and Jalen Carter was before him. Georgia has a tradition of excellence on that defensive line, and guys step in and play right away and make impacts right away, and they continue to grow and develop under the guidance of Trey Scott. It's a good thing that they've got leaders like Nazir Stackhouse, Zion Logue, Warren Brinson, but they've got a really good, talented young group of guys with Kristen Miller and Jordan Hall too.
There's talent everywhere on this roster, no doubt about it. That's why you win 2 national championships. Those rings were phenomenal, by the way. Wow, that's pretty sharp.
I personally thought the Peach Bowl ring was even cooler than the.
It was. The Peach Bowl ring was really nice, really
red
nice
and black
compared
ring.
to it.
Yeah, that one that caught the eye of some fans. Obviously the national championship ring. That's the big one, the bling that everyone wants to show. But that red and black looked really good. And I loved the faint touch of the clock striking midnight on the scoreboard.
Yeah, Georgia fans will remember the national championship, but they'll always remember where they were exactly when Georgia beat Ohio State in the Peach Bowl. Let's talk about talented room, and let's get to this real quick. Obviously, the big topic of conversation. If Bear Alexander doesn't transfer, this is the conversation of the weekend, and it still kind of was, the quarterback position. Now, I want to kind of give you just what I've gathered. I didn't watch the game. This is why we brought you on to talk about it. A lot of people are feeling this is a 2-horse race. It really is. And what Gunnar Stockton has done is admirable. Talented kid. I watched this kid in high school. Really good, really good talent. But it really feels like this is a Brock versus Beck. And now we'll go with the double Bs there. Vandergriff against Carson Beck in this sense. Look, is Carson Beck the quarterback? I'm starting to see a lot of this kind of stuff. If we know Kirby's not going to make this decision on April 17th. We know that's not happening. But if from everything you gather, does it feel like Carson Beck is QB1 heading into the summer?
Yeah, absolutely. He was by far the most impressive quarterback that Georgia had out there on Saturday. He was the number 1 quarterback coming into the spring in terms of the reps that he was going to receive. They wanted Brock and Gunnar to push him. They wanted, if one of those guys, proved to be a better option, then they weren't afraid to roll with one of them. But Carson Beck is who they expected to be QB1 based on the amount of time that he's spent in this system. And I say it as a system. Obviously, there's a new offensive coordinator with Mike Bobo, but they are keeping a ton of the same terminology and verbiage transitioning from Monken to Bobo. So it really is a system, and Carson Beck has spent 3 years in the system. Brock Vandergriff has spent 2. Gunnar has spent 1. Well, Brock and Gunnar have yet to combined. They've yet to complete a pass in a collegiate game. Gunnar Stockton has not appeared in a game. Brock Vandergriff has thrown, I think, 3 or 5 passes I mean, they haven't received the same, they haven't had the same experience that Carson Beck has had. And I think that has been a huge benefit to him. Talking to him after the game, talking to him this spring, you can tell how much the experience and the reps that he's gotten has helped him. Both the game reps that he got before, thanks to Stetson Bennett and company blowing out some teams, and Beck being able to get in there and actually throw the ball around. I mean, surprising to some Georgia fans, I feel like more often than not when the backup quarterback comes in, it's handoff, and let's get off the field. But Carson Beck was able to get in there and throw the ball around some and develop as a quarterback. I think that was huge for him. I think that was huge for him, and I think it was big for him over those other two guys that haven't had that same experience. And so as he continues to get more reps, as he continued to get more reps throughout the spring, I think he only got better and better. Look, we have been told that was the best that he played all spring. And, going 13 for 18 in the first half with 211 yards, very impressive. If that's the best that he played, well, what were the other days looking like? That's what we're not able to see. That's why I think that there still is a competition. Brock Vandergriff had a good spring. He made up some ground in that quarterback competition. But Carson Beck was clearly the best quarterback option for Georgia on Saturday, and I would be very surprised if he's not the starter come September.
I'm not as concerned, if I'm a Georgia fan, about Gunnar Stockton in the sense of, like what you said, 1 year in the program. Kid seems to have a really good head on his shoulders, understanding the spot he's in. But if I'm a Georgia fan, and I've already seen Bear Alexander enter, and I'm pretty sure this is a conversation that is taking place, Brock Vandegrift told reporters, if I'm not mistaken, and the quote was something along the lines like, I'm going to take some time with my family, pray about this, and figure out what we want to do next. He didn't really shut the door on the option to leave, which, for him is a smart choice. That's when you speak publicly, I think a completely smart choice. But it also lets some schools know that, hey, it's going to be interesting to see kind of what happens. Now, I want to say this before I hand it off to you here. Correct me if I'm wrong. If Vandergriff were to enter the portal and transfer within the SEC, since that deadline has passed, he would have to sit out this fall. February 15th, I believe, was the deadline to transfer within the conference. So if he does, there's 13 teams in the SEC that are not going to be able to get him on the field this fall. What are the odds, in your opinion, where he starts to see the writing on the wall? Media kind of sees it. Some of the fans do. Does he have, in your opinion, kind of a realistic idea of maybe in the next couple of days, does his name pop up?
It could. It absolutely could. Would that be surprising? I say yes because of what he has told us this spring. And, he felt comfortable staying in this program because he was being developed, because he was getting better. He absolutely got better this spring. And so, as he makes the transition into summer workouts and towards fall camp and the season that'll follow, he can still get better. We're looking at a kid here that is going to graduate in December. That's out there. So if he wanted to leave after December, he could go and he could go wherever he wanted. Obviously that would be the case regardless of whether he graduated or not. But I think getting a degree from Georgia means a lot to him being from this area. He didn't grow up a Georgia fan, so that's not, but I think he understands what it means to be QB1 for the Bulldogs. So, and not even QB1, just a QB for the Bulldogs. What that opportunity would mean to him, I think it would mean a lot. I will say this. I loved hearing from Brock this spring because I thought he was honest. I thought he was very honest about his where he's at mentally, physically, in this competition, his approach to it all. I really did enjoy hearing from both of them. Brock, I felt like Carson, probably knowing that he has the upper hand already, he's kind of got a little bit of that coach speak to him a little bit. But Brock being the guy that's the underdog that has nothing to lose, I felt like he was a little bit more honest. Maybe had a little bit of a Stetson Bennett like to him. So I would say, would I be shocked, surprised if he were to enter the transfer portal? No. I do think that it's not out of the realm of possibility for that to happen, but it's also not out of the realm of possibility for him to see how much he grew this spring, see how much growth Carson made as a backup, and who knows? I mean, if Carson Beck could be one and done, it could be a Mac Jones type situation where he starts for one season and he heads off to the NFL. He's certainly got that caliber of weapons around him with this very, very talented and versatile wide receiver group. So that's a possibility that Brock stays and learns and continues to grow. And then Carson goes pro and, Brock is sitting there with QB1, at his fingertips. But but I would also not be surprised if he entered the transfer portal. That is certainly, Bear Alexander being a big story. Brock Vandergriff entering the transfer portal would be a much bigger story.
Let's wrap it up right here. Give me 3 names that just stood out to you. Maybe you didn't talk a lot about them during spring practice and stuff like that, but 3 names that just kind of popped off the paper and maybe to your eye on Saturday in the spring game for Georgia.
I'll say Damon Wilson is one for sure. True freshman, early enrollee, outside linebacker, Georgia's highest rated signee. Had 2 sacks in the game, got a ton of pressure. Really, that there was an early enrollee defense of sorts that ran the second team for the Red Squad, and they all had really strong days. I mentioned Jordan Hall earlier with 2 pass breakups at the line of scrimmage. Damon with 2 sacks. Raylan Wilson had a pick 6. C.J. Allen had more tackles than him, and the top 4 tacklers for that team were early enrollees. 2 of the guys tied for 5th were early enrollees. So a very, very talented group there. Not that the present isn't bright, but the future is very bright for Georgia there. I'm excited to see Dominic Lovett and this receiver group. Like I said, very versatile. I mean, I think you're looking at a group that can do it all. You've got Lab McConkey, Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, that can kind of, multitask playing on the inside, outside. Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint is experienced. Arian Smith had himself a strong spring game, had 2 touches and 2 touchdowns. So it is the best receiver group that I've seen at Georgia, covering this team for a few years and talking to other folks that have covered it for longer. It's the best that they've seen too. So excited to see those guys. And then the names that I would keep an eye on, the third name that I will mention is Julian Humphrey. In a cornerback competition, he's a guy that took a lot of steps forward in the right direction. Nyland Green and Dalen Everett were the 2 that were considered to be the front runners there. Julian Humphrey showed up and made himself a part of that competition for that starting spot opposite of Kamari Lassiter. So that's one more. And I'll add one more in here because I thought this was super interesting. Javon Bullard being the defensive MVP from the national championship game, 3 turnovers in the first half, 1 defensive MVP of the Peach Bowl as well. Everyone knows what he can do. But last year he played star primarily. Looks like he's going to get a look at safety, potentially as the first team safety there, opening the door for Tyke Smith to start at star. And overall just gets a more veteran group out there on that defensive backfield for Georgia. So, I know you said 3, I gave you more than that, but, hope you don't mind.
That's icing on the cake right there. Hey, that's the Georgia Spring Report with Palmer Thombs of On3. Does a fantastic job. Make sure to go over, check out the work they do over there, the podcast they have, the good group they have, and just a stellar staff. And Palmer, appreciate the time as always. And, continue to enjoy the spring before we kick it back up again. Camp season SEC Media Days, which I'm sure we'll see each other in your hometown, in your Nashville. So you'll have to take me somewhere good to eat, a little local spot away from all the tourism and everything. It'll be fun. We'll talk next time. This has been the Crowded Booth, talking Georgia football, spring report, Bear Alexander, quarterbacks, and some names to watch as the summer approaches. We'll catch you next time. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and if you're listening on podcasts, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, or wherever you get your audio, make sure to like and subscribe as well as there. This has been another episode of the Crowded Booth.